Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us again for this vital webinar. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the work that we here at Women of Color Network do and why economic justice for survivors is so crucial. You're also welcome to tweet out learnings and information from this webinar using the hashtag economic justice and our WOCN network and my handle at Swervy Poet. We'd love to, again, share the information across the field. So in terms of the work that we do here, we wanted to really start by bringing everyone into the room. So if using the chat box, if folks could just kind of take a moment to map out some of the economic justice needs that you see for survivors that you're working with and serving, as well as some of the resources that you bring into the work. So we're just going to take a moment, and again, if you want to open up your group chat box, I'll send out that question in the chat as well, but we're really excited to first gather some of the information from folks who are joining us because we know that all of you are experts in this work. Awesome. So again, feel free to answer those questions through the chat box. Just a little bit about the Economic Policy and Leadership Project here at the Women of Color Network. We really want to ground ourselves in historical oppression, the roots of why we need an economic justice movement and why economic justice is crucial, particularly for survivors of color and Indigenous survivors. One of the speakers at our Western Regional Forum in 2016, Susan Burton, who is the executive director at a New Way of Life Reentry Project, talked about how being poor and of color is a debt that keeps incurring interest. And for us at the Women of Color Network, what that means is that wealth inequity and economic justice struggles that we have for survivors in our communities generally is really rooted in a history of colonization, genocide, enslavement, and exploitation of immigrant labor. And so we want to really keep that history at the forefront of the work and the need for all the economic justice issues that you see. And on another side of the coin, Kajwa Vaj from Freedom Inc. spoke about how if leadership has failed, we are the new leaders. And so we hold both of these truths together, that we are challenging historical oppression in our present day work, and that it has present manifestations, and also that we are the leaders that we need to see. Broadly, the mission of the Women of Color Network is to eliminate violence against all women and communities by centralizing the voices and promoting leadership of women of color across sovereign nations, the United States, and U.S. territories. And we do that through an intersectional lens and approach. And so what this means from our perspective is that in addition to traditional categories of domestic violence and sexual assault, we also really acknowledge global contexts of colonialism, imperialism, racism, sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, ability issues, and other forms of oppression that of course intersect with violence against women of color in our communities. And so that means everything from police brutality to the conversation today about extensions of mass incarceration, including immigrant detention and sexually exploited youth, are central to ending violence in our communities and in women's lives in our communities. In our Economic Policy and Leadership Project, we want to make sure that not only that our voices are at every table, but that the inventive innovations that we make in our culturally specific programs and our communities really have the possibility and the impact of transforming lives, communities, institutions, the field, and our society generally. So oftentimes we know that our programs are under-resourced, but really we're at the cutting edge of innovation. And so as you'll hear from our presenters today, the work that we do is so crucial for transforming our field, our work, and also inequity in general. And what we do here through the Economic Policy and Leadership Project is nurture spaces like this where we can share information about economic security and gender-based violence. We also enable leadership development, particularly around policy advocacy and the importance of policy advocacy in our work to enable structural transformation as well as day-to-day services delivery. And particularly crucial to us is engaging work across movements and silos. We know often that the work to end violence against women and intimate partner violence generally can be siloed, and we firmly believe that the work that we do is deeply connected to movements of liberation in terms of racial equity, queer liberation, and all of the movements that we know related to social justice. So particularly today, you'll see how that conversation crucially connects around immigrant detention as well as youth advocacy. Some of the work that we've done, which is on our website at our Economic and Policy Leadership page, includes reports and papers around reentry services and survivors reentering communities after incarceration, as well as tribal sexual assault issues, and thinking about T&U visas. And we've also done some work in terms of thinking about, from our own vantage point, what does economic justice mean and what does healing mean? And so for our communities, we know that economic justice not only includes access to things that many of you are speaking to in terms of issues that survivors seek, which is transportation access, healthcare, housing, and shelter, but also in terms of reproductive and mental health access. It includes access to jobs with security, benefits, training, and living wages, and also the resources and information to make the best decisions for our lives. And crucially and fundamentally, economic justice from our own vantage point and what we've heard from advocates in the field as well as survivors is that this includes, economic justice includes connection to community, connection to healing, connection generally, which often structures of capitalism and other kinds of oppression, disable, and fundamentally being able to be sustainable and to live with authenticity and dignity. So that definition of economic justice that we've heard from our constituents and communities is often broader than conventional access to wealth, which certainly is important, but all of these in terms of access to community, access to care, and access to being one's true self. So with that, I'm so excited to give a little bit of also the hopefulness of the Economic Policy and Leadership Project, which is to make connections around organizing and policy advocacy and healing. And so you see here some of our prior speakers at our convenings who talk about this connection. Marsha Olivo at the Miami Workers Center talks about the truth about healing is that it's a way of life and connected to community organizing. Joyce Kyles, who talks about repairing the justice system because healing for her is accepting that the justice system needs repair. And Linda Eagle, speaker from the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, who spoke about, as Native Americans, we heal in ceremony and we must value our spirit. So with that frame, I am so excited. I know that was like a lot of information and background on the Women of Color Network and the Economic Policy and Leadership Project, but we really wanted to make sure to dive in and save so much time for our amazing presenters today. So within the work, we know currently we're in a phase in terms of the work that we do on a day-to-day level where opportunities for survivors seeking asylum due to gender-based violence have been removed. And so we know that we're coming to this work at a particular moment in our country's history where inequity has become structural in an even more enhanced form. And because of that context, I'm so excited to have Jessica Camacho, who is the board vice president at the Central Ohio Workers Center, speak to us on some of their deportation defense work and speak to the concrete ways in which they've been working to enable more safety and possibility for immigrant communities, particularly at this time of heightened criminalization. So I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, who has been doing amazing work on the ground, and I'm so excited for all of y'all to learn from her wisdom.
Like she said, I am a vice president for Central Ohio Workers Center. We do two main things. We are currently a labor and community center with people who have experienced abuse or wage theft at their workplace, feel unsafe, feel unwelcome. They come to our center for help and healing and resources and networking and support from us. The other part that we've also been focusing on is how do we provide an environment where our immigrants can also seek justice for their rights, their labor rights. How can they go to the doctors and the hospitals and not be afraid of being deported for seeking those resources? So those are two of the things that we focus on. Pearly, could you go on to the next, please? So with that being said, I would like to ground ourselves on like why we do this work, and more specifically, why this work is so important to me. What you're looking at right now is at a picture that one of the kids that I helped out, one of my kiddos from the CARE project. It is a project where they have worked with the detention center in Dili. Dili has the second largest detention center in the world. It houses mothers and children who are seeking asylum into the United States. So these are people that have either turned themselves in or have been stopped by immigration enforcement while crossing the border and have stated that they fear going back from the place that they've fled. And are asking for refuge in the United States. One of my kids stated how the children were separated by ages, and then they would leave the lights on 24/7 to mess with their brains, for them to lose track of their days and nights while they spend the time there. The circle in the middle is where they kept all the officers and the computers. And then the boxes on the two sides, that's where they separated the mothers and children. He stated that sometimes throughout the night or day, they would take them all out, line them up, as you can see the little dots right through the middle. They would line them up and have them do like jumping jacks, push-ups, and these were children. These were 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, sometimes 16 and 15-year-olds were put in with adults. And so this is one of the centers that they were put in. This is also called La Hielera. It's known as La Hielera, which translates to the icebox. It is a very, very cold place. And a lot of the children have families have come and like crossed through the Rio and are sitting in this detention, in this prison, with their wet clothes and have no access to medical care or anything. The next pictures that I will show you are of two of the other kids that I helped out. Eli asked me what life in the United States was. And when I asked him what he hoped for and what he wanted to know what the United States was like, he drew a picture of a playground. That's him swinging in a playground area. And he said for him, coming to the United States meant that he could finally have a place where he could be a kid, a playground where he would feel safe and not be terrorized by gang members who wanted to kidnap him or force him to do drugs. And the other thing that they were really excited about was being able to see snow for the first time. And the lower two pictures is Minor. Minor and his little sister were also coming and seeking asylum. So these pictures were drawn. So the way the CARE project works is the first stage is La Hielera, the second stage is La Perrera. La Perrera translates to the dog pound. Again, mothers and children are separated by ages, and they're put in these dog cages and held there until they are able to transport them to a detention center like the Dili Detention Center and another one in Texas. Once they get to the Dili Detention Center, it's where the children finally explain that they feel better because they can finally take a shower and they finally have a meal. And for them, a meal consists of a piece of bread with deli meat with ham or turkey and a piece of cheese and a small juice as their meal for the day. And they finally get to take a shower. And while there's it's a pro bono help. So people from people from all over the United States travel to the delayed detention center, are trained to give legal aid to these mothers and children and prepare them on how to give their testimony, how to tell the immigration officers that they are seeking asylum in their first stages. So with that being said, we realized that when the mothers were getting the help, that if they passed their first asylum interview, then they would be sent out either to a home with other mothers seeking the same type of asylum, to family members, or to friends or relatives in different parts of the United States. And once they got there, they were expected to be able to find an attorney, find housing, find jobs, find placement, put their kids in school, but they weren't giving the resources or the help to do that. And so there's clearly a need where these mothers are trying to find safety, but they're also challenged with language barriers and all these other other difficulties and challenges that they are not supported through. So Austin and I started working and saw this great need and realized that in our community, we also had families in need of immigration support. But more importantly, we also saw a great part of our community being put in deportation procedures. And there was a lot of people in our community, especially after the elections, trying to help but not knowing how. And so we started working, and next slide, please, the Beginner's Guide to Deportation Defense. In this slide, you see Franklin County right in the middle. That is where we have a lot of our population gets pulled over, whether it's driving without a license, they have a light on, they didn't stop long enough at a stop sign, and they get pulled over. They're stopped without a driver's license. They do not have to, but some police officers are choosing to keep them in their facilities for up to 48 hours to notify ICE. And so ICE has 48 hours in that time frame to come and decide if they want to pick up that person and put them in possibly deportation procedures because they don't have the documentation to be driving or to be here. And a lot of the times what we see here is that we don't keep them. People don't keep them in those big cities like in Columbus and Cincinnati, right? They're sent to Monroe or Butler County because they realize that if people are sitting in a populated city where they can have easy access to an attorney or a support network or the workers center that can step in and start taking them out of the jail or out of police custody, then they don't have those 48 hours, right? But if they know that if they can transfer them to one of those jails or facilities that are farther away from big cities, then it is harder to pay for an attorney to drive to those counties, to drive to those jails, to get a support system or a support network over there. So they do that on purpose, right? And then on top is our immigration court that we have. So from Columbus, to get an idea for people that are not here, from Columbus to that immigration court, it's about a 2-hour drive. And so it is purposely divided in different parts of the city and different parts of the state to make it more complicated for people to access help and resources from attorneys and legal aid. Next slide. Okay, so part of our workshop, we make sure that we are telling people, we first started doing the workshop, making sure that it was people in our community, people that wanted to stay involved, people that were outraged by what was happening to the immigrant community, to our immigrant community, and more specifically our undocumented community. And this workshop was initially put together to make sure that those people that wanted to stay involved, that wanted to start knowing how to prevent a deportation or stop a deportation from happening, how they could go about that and how they could be that support system. And later on, I'll expand to what it is now. We want to make sure that this is not a workshop where we give legal advice, because a deportation defense is a very serious issue that we're trying to protect. And this is not a legal advice. This is just help for deportation. The first part of our, it's set into two parts. The first part is basically teaching people about why deportation exists, why our immigration history, why do we have that right now. A couple terms that we have to see here is entry without inspection. So entry without inspection, people think of like, oh, there's people crossing the borders, they're like criminals, right? Well, entry without inspection is it is not a criminal law being broken, it's a civil law. So it's within the same category of like a parking violation. It is not a criminal violation, it's a civil violation. So it's part of the civil law. What makes someone deportable and the difference between the deportability and immigration status, right? Next slide, please. We also talk about people, how challenging this department is. We're expecting mothers and children from like the CARE project and in our community to be able to figure out this entire chart. We go from four different branches that have an extended a part of like network and people working for them. And we have an immigrant mother who is struggling with all these changes, trying to figure out how to cross all these hoops and all these challenges to be able to seek safety and security for her children and herself. So we talk about how challenging the immigration system is. The different stages and when someone can get pulled over, stopped, how they can start a deportation process and things like that. So this is our enforcement of all the different branches on immigration. And a quick thing right here. The Department of Health and Human Services, DHS, this is a department that has lost the children that we heard in the news, and we're still hearing in the news that once they are in their custody, they get sent out to people. So before, it used to be where children were put into La Hielera and they became part of the DHS system, that they would have to ask for legal documentation to prove that that child was in their custody, had to have a criminal background check, fingerprints, and follow up and making sure that this child was in fact supposed to be under their care. Well, our immigration system, DHS decided that system was too long and was too lengthy, and they needed a process that was much faster. So now they changed it to where someone comes in and it's like, hey, this person is in your system and they should be under our care. This child gets now sent to that individual, and that is how we're losing thousands of children every year, hundreds of children every year through the system, because we do not have an actual system to keep track of the children, to keep them safe and make sure that they do not end up in human trafficking or labor. Next slide, please. We talk about the removal process. So we give different cases that are currently in our community. So we talk about how step one is how someone gets into deportation procedure, whether it's a police stop, and then their deportation procedures. Talk about how notice to appear is when you're notified to appear into immigration court. And the removal procedure sometimes is seen as the news as like somebody gets picked up, they're automatically put on the bus and they're taken. Yes, it can happen, but it can also be a process of many, many years. We had a gentleman in our community that was from Cuba. He was ordered a removal of deportation order, but because at that time they couldn't deport to Cuba, he stayed in the United States for 35 years with us. And it wasn't until this man was homeless and needing of medical care and was stopped by a police officer many years later, so in 2017, I believe. And because everything going on in our politics, now he was deportable to Cuba. So again, he was put in deportation procedures again, and we had to fight his case. Luckily, he is still with us right now. We were able to fight his case. he is with a family right now. But again, we're trying to teach people that deportation procedures can be anywhere from 1 year to 2 years. And sometimes it takes strategizing and going back to the beginning, asking for different reliefs. So our final stage is either a removal order or some type of relief, whether it's like a U visa, asylum, or reopening different cases. Next slide. Next slide, please. So what is deportation defense? It's when we're trying to keep a family together. And when we're trying to keep a family together and the strategies that go into that work. So our immediate goal, like I stated, is when someone is under police custody, we have 48 hours to get them out of there as soon as we can. So the faster we get them released from police custody, the less we reduce the possibility of them encountering immigration enforcement. How do we slow down or stop a deportation? This could be as simple as having a bunch of people showing up at the jail and saying hey, we're here for this individual. We know what you're doing. We're here. We're supporting. Or just simply putting an attorney on their name on the record to get them started, right? Obtain temporary or permanent immigration status. That could be like a U visa. Somebody is eligible, whether it was domestic violence, something happened in our workplace, and we are able to get the process started for a temporary or permanent immigration status. This can also be as when DACA came out in 2012, people had been pulled over and now they were eligible for DACA. That is also fits into that category. And then provide comprehensive social support. For me, as a future social worker and someone who works in the mental health, that means reaching out to the family and knowing what their needs are, knowing what the family is needing at that moment, whether it's therapy, whether it's food, whether it's transportation, making sure that we have a network where we can provide that for them. And then our larger goal, obviously, is to resist the extension of immigration enforcement. There are currently 4 prisons opening up being presented to open in Ohio. And so we know that if we have more beds available, then they're going to start filling them up. And that means that our undocumented, our immigrant, our LGBTQ, our homeless populations, our communities are in danger of being and having to fill those beds. So how do we stop immigration enforcement and detention centers from opening in our communities? Bringing people and resources into the movement, having trainings like these ones, having trainings like the National Women of Color Network to do these events, running those trainings, keeping our communities informed, pushing back against the system, and building a coalition full of power. Next slide. It is important that everyone that goes into our trainings understands that deportation defense is not a game. We have to make sure that we are not the ones that have to live with the consequences of whatever we recommend or whatever we do with them, right? So one thing in social work that I learned, next slide, please, is one thing in social work that that has really helped me and has really guided my work is self-determination. The best thing that we can do for the people that we're trying to help is inform ourselves. Once we inform ourselves, be knowledgeable enough to present all the different type of options to the family having to deal with these deportation and being challenged with deportation. Being able to inform them of all the consequences of every decision they make. Being able to provide the resources and the network and the support. If there's things that you don't ask, how do we reach out to other social workers, to other immigration attorneys, to other criminal attorneys to be able to answer those questions? And lastly, allowing those families to decide exactly what they want to do in their case. The only thing we can do, we should not be pushing or persuading or making people do something, because they're the ones that have to live with them. They're the ones that they're going to have to leave their children behind if that's their best option. They're the ones that are going to have to be in a church and sanctuary and not be able to see their kids every day. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with those consequences. So as people from the outside trying to help them, we have to make sure that we are informed ourselves, share all the information we can, make sure that we have all the resources, that we don't know the answers, and then allowing them to make that decision and support them, whatever their decision is. Because once we have done our part, then they will do what is best for their family and for them. Next slide, please. We talk about the deportation defense cycle. So usually what happens is we get a call. The Central Ohio Worker Center gets a call at whatever time of the day and says, so-and-so got pulled over. So we train a group on how to gather information. Has this person been deported before? What is their full name? Were they drinking and driving? Was it at their job? Did they search his car? Like, we need to gather all the information. And sometimes that can be very difficult when you hear somebody doing this, somebody getting pulled over. We have a team of people trained on how to gather that information. Reaching out to Black Lives Matter, other religious groups, other faith groups, other movements in our community to make sure that we are building a coalition of power. Plan and intervention, whether that means bringing in other communities, bringing on attorneys, whatever that person needs, that family needs. Execute the intervention, whether that is a sit-in, going out to people at their immigration interview, assess the impact, monitor the case. Again, these cases could go anywhere from a few days, a few weeks, to a few years. Sometimes it just takes keeping an eye on it and keeping the people informed. And whether that is escalation, the next thing that comes from that is escalation or changing everything. And again, going back to the deportation relief and continuing to understand the process, understand the system that we're fighting against, running these trainings. And next slide, please. While we do this entire cycle, we are able to let people come in different stages and having them understand that even though they may not speak Spanish, where they can translate at the court, they can still help out with childcare. They can still provide transportation. So they are needed, and their gifts are needed in all sorts of the cycle. It is important to know for us that deportation defense is part of the immigrant right movement, but it's also a part of a social movement, social justice movement that includes environmental justice, reproductive rights, indigenous rights, labor movement, the Black Lives Matter, and we're all fighting the same monster: racism, sexism, police power, mass incarceration. We know that we're fighting the same monster. The people that make the grilletes for Black moms and dads and poor communities are the same people that put grilletes and make the grilletes on women seeking asylum at detention centers. Next slide. So for us, this has changed in many, many ways. We are currently working with the National Association of National Social Workers, National Association of Social Workers in Ohio, to make sure that our mental health providers are aware of this. We had a case in Ohio a few years back where a social worker had found out that their client was undocumented, and she was trying to help him and didn't know what resources were available to him because of his immigration status. So she ended up calling ICE, asking for help. And of course, this individual was unfortunately put in deportation procedures because our mental health provider was not trained on how to provide services to this individual. How do we make sure that our school knows how to act to make sure that we had a case also in Columbus where a father was detained while dropping off his child at school. And it wasn't until like after the dad was like beaten and taken by police that school staff realized that the child was still in the car, frozen and unable to move because he was just in shock after seeing what had happened to his family and his dad. And so how do we make sure that our schools is a support network and not something that now kids have to fear and think that their parents are going to be deported from that? Immigration attorneys, doctors, other health providers are also able to get trained in how to help and how to be anti-oppressive when it comes down to helping our immigrant community. Next one, please. If you guys have any questions, would like to stay involved, would like to know more about our training, go ahead, reach out to us. We would be happy to extend information. All of these resources are available to you. Please go ahead and use them. We put a lot of time and effort into making them, but it is for the community. It's for our community to be empowered. So if you have any suggestions, please throw them at us. But we would also love to change it and make it better. So yeah, that is all I got for you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I have so much praise and admiration for the work you do every day, and I know that it's rooted in the real violence that women and kids and families are experiencing, and we can hear that in how you share the information. And also, it's just amazing to see the ways in which we can actually interrupt these cycles of deportation, and from the self-determination frame of a social worker to collective action. So thank you both for rooting us in the horror of what's happening and also our brilliant opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to continue this amazing wealth of wisdom sharing and brilliance by enabling Jennifer Swain, the Executive Director at Youth Spark, Inc., and one of her teammates at the organization as well, to talk about intervening with sexually exploited youth and disrupting youth detention. So I'm so pleased to have Jennifer speak to some of the long-term work that she's been doing around youth trafficking and intervening to go beyond solutions that are simply reinforcing incarceration. So Jennifer, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I jump right in now?
Yes.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm so thankful to be a part of this, Pervy, everybody, and what you're doing at WOCN is really amazing. And I'm excited to share just a little bit about what we are working on today here at Youth Spark, our youth services center. Youth Spark was really one of the very first organizations created here in Atlanta to respond to the needs of domestic minor sex trafficking victims back in early 2000. And we've been really fortunate as an NGO to really transition our mission over the years to sort of respond to our response and move out front. And so today I'll just share a little bit about what we do here at Youth Spark. And then also, I really want to give you guys an opportunity. I just thought this is a really amazing opportunity to have one of our fabulous survivor leaders and team members, Ms. Dorsey Jones, just to come and share some of her experiences. One of the things that, and you can look at the next slide, Kirby. One of the things that we think is really important here is that we do have survivor leadership and representation on our staff of experiences that youth are referred to us. And so I'm really proud of my direct services team here because we really do have people that are brave enough to share their own life experiences, including having a survivor on staff, a member of the LGBTQ community who really helps to stand in the gap for some of the kids that we've seen come through. And so our organization is really in a unique position because we are able to advocate for youth who are in need of legal and adult protection in abusive and exploitative situations. And we are based inside of the Fulton County Juvenile Court, which is the largest juvenile court in the Southeast region. They see over 5,000 cases a year. And when people tend to think about juvenile court, you automatically, I think our minds automatically think that the kids have broken the law or that they've done something wrong, when really half of the cases that come through this juvenile court is really from youth who didn't do anything wrong at all. It's really youth who have had the adults in their lives fail to protect them. And so I'll just share a little bit about that partnership. And if you'll go to the next slide, Kirby, one of the things that we always talk about is just defining the problem. Go ahead. And if there's anybody on this thread that is a complete newbie, I'd probably be shocked because if you're part of the Women of Color Network, then you are probably already working in this arena. But I always like to just start with our approach, in that we always consider every child under the age of 18, and even young people beyond that, is that there's no such thing as a child prostitute. We just don't use those words. We don't teach our ambassadors and our community members to use those words. We really want to make sure that kids are treated as kids, and despite the adults who decided to make them adults. And so, I mean, we always say that language is so important. If you have a young person that has been picked up in a law enforcement sting, and this is not a dig to any law enforcement that we have in the room, but if you sometimes have a kid that's been picked up in a sting, the simple way that you write that child's report is going to determine how they're going to be received into care. If you say that I have a 14-year-old prostitute who was found on, Fulton Industrial Boulevard and they were soliciting services, then you're going to typically treat that child as a prostitute. And, I want you guys to sort of, if we want to engage here on the group chat, when you hear that word prostitute, tell me really like what's one of the first things that comes to your mind. Anybody that feels like, dropping out there, because when you hear that term, and I think this is a safe space, Kirby. So if there's anybody that's, don't be ashamed to say it, because, thank you, Smith and Madeline, for saying it, because you think about something dirty. You think about, someone that's wanting to do this. You think about an adult choosing to make a choice. Thank you, Cynthia. You took it right out of my mouth, is that, and so we just don't even use those terms, prostitutes. Thank you, Dr. Kirby, because you're right. I think when you hear that term, you automatically make that kid think that they've done something wrong, or if they even had the choice to begin with to engage in that behavior. So one of the things that we do a lot is not only do we talk about the community and share in that way, but we also talk to our kids about that. We talk to kids about language. We go all the way in. We have some very non-traditional services. And so we invite the kids to talk to us and tell us what the new words are. If we're afraid to use the language, how can we really connect with them if we don't know how to say, break down like what a thought is? And if a thought is someone who pays, or if you're just a whore if you have sex and you don't get any money. These are questions and conversations that we have with kids all the time. And while they may associate prostitution with, Law and Order SVU or the movie Taken, they don't consider it sometimes, from what we see on our end, they don't consider themselves to be victims at all, because they're not engaging in that kind of behavior. And they just feel like that, hey, I'm having sex anyway, and he just said I should get some money, and he's going to protect me. He's just going to drive me, or I didn't really know how to work the internet, but he really helped me move through, and he taught me how to make a Gmail account. And when you begin to allow them to have their truthful conversations and engage with them in real life conversations the way that they are, that is truly when they begin to tell you exactly what their experiences are. And again, these are all different terms. Domestic minor sex trafficking is sort of what's used at the federal level, but at its core, anytime it's sexual abuse accompanied by remuneration in cash or in kind to the child or a third person, it's just it is exploitation and trafficking. Okay, next slide, Kirby. And so again, I think that everybody can sit here. Thank you, everybody, for replying to my question. I appreciate that, because I think that when we talk about the problem, we kind of see this as the surface. Like, we all know that this is an iceberg, right? And I think for us, we really look at it to say that this is what we see, that when the kid or the young person, when the victim comes to us, this is all we see. We see what has happened to you. We see the sex act, or we know that you've been online or you've been in the strip club, and this is what we know right now. And if you go to the next slide, these are all of the things that happened to that kid before they got there, that we as the community and nonprofit organizations and youth serving organizations, we have the unique ability to intervene at those times a lot easier than we do when we get to the point that they've already been exploited. And so I like to use this diagram because I really want people to see that, you know, there is not a super major equation that says here's how you end trafficking. I like to think that there are, but most organizations that try to tell you that, in my opinion, they're not being honest with you because there is just no easy way. And if you just do this, then she will never go back into it. Because there's a lot of intersection and correlation to, you know, young people who are involved in commercial sexual exploitation, but then those who are also involved in domestic violence. When you have that unhealthy relationship, when you have blurred the boundaries and, you know, you are forming unhealthy relationships, I think it all translates into one victimization, and it's easy for kids to sort of pull in and out from that one. What's the next slide? And so here's what we know, okay? So here in Georgia, we look at the issue on both the supply and demand side. I mean, because the truth is, if nobody wanted to buy sex from a young person, no one could sell it. And we started out in 2008 really doing a lot of research on girls and how they were being exploited. And then in 2010, we wanted to push it a step further and figure out what we know about the men who are buying them, because we can't just attack both sides, right? And so it's like, who's waking up on Black Friday standing in line for a VCR, right? If you have bought a VCR in the last 12 months, I want you to come on that group chat and tell us, because I don't believe you. But I also, you know, recognize that, you know, you have to use and understand the basic, you know, laws of economics. And if you take away the demand for a product, the supply automatically goes down. And so for us, we really look at this as a supply and demand issue. And unfortunately, our kids and victims are supply. But if we only ever heal victims, that's all we're ever going to do. We have to disrupt the market and make sure that those who have the demand for paid sex with young people, whether they are 16 years old, whether they're 17, or whether they're 18 in one day, we know that young people, there's a larger desire for young people to pay for paid sex acts. So I'm really grateful that at our organization, not only do we heal kids coming through, our youth center is right here inside of Fulton County Juvenile Court, and I think it is just an amazing partnership that we're able to sort of really infiltrate the system and be right here to intervene. And then we also use these experiences and what we've learned in other research to really attack the purchasers. And so in 2010, we conducted research on buyers and was able to really take that model and look at how we can disrupt those who seek to purchase sex. So I think when I talk about just how do we educate the community, yes, the kids, the girls, they really are, they really, really are. Thank you, Dr. Kirby. But they really are what break our hearts, right? The kids really are the reason I think that we all do this tough, hard, nasty work. But we really should be getting very upset at the fact that we have this problem, and it's so perpetuated now, even more so online than ever before, because there are people who really think that this is okay, and they think it's okay because they've been engaged in it, or they think it's okay because they've been taught that as a man, if you have money, then you are able to pay for whatever it is that you want. And that's a whole other webinar, a whole different topic for us, but it really helps to validate the work of our staff who's in the trenches every day. It really helps to validate when we go down to the legislature to really be able to talk about why we must do this. We have to have the real stories of the kids. And so especially if you're taking your experiences and you are using them to advocate for legislative successes, like you have to have the survivor accounts as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And so since we've expanded, we used to primarily only work with girls. And again, we work with Georgia State University on the Atlanta Homeless and Runaway Youth Count. And that's where we really begin to see that as much as services as I think that, and I don't know about your respective communities, but we have a ton of services for girls. We have a residential treatment for girls. We got, mentoring programs for girls, but nobody really wants to touch boys or LGBTQ youth. And so we recognize even for those groups that there are a lot of gaps in services. And so we really wanted to take the lessons that we've learned with the girls over these last couple of years and really build the framework to help boys and LGBTQ youth, recognize victimization as well. Our center, serves, mostly 98% of color. And I make sure that I always do that as a caveat to say that, trafficking happens in every culture and every community. It just looks differently. So, we just can't expect, because Fulton County is located within the geographical area that it's located, that just because we serve all kids of color, that, it's only Black or only Latino youth that are experiencing, these types of issues. No, that's just what it looks like here. But I'm sure in other communities where the community is reflective of all Caucasians or Asians or whatever, that their victims are going to be reflective of them as well. We'll go to the next slide. And I think this part is really important because, in our work with survivors, and me specifically over the years, I've always found that education is really critical to a survivor's success. And I mean education, not about, do you know who to call if you need to, get away from your pimp. I'm talking about beyond that. Do you know what it means to share your story? Do you know what it means to use your experience to advocate with your legislators? Do you know how to share your experience and help to train local law enforcement? So one of the things I think is really important for our approach is that we sort of bring survivors to the table. It's no longer about us coming here, and I really appreciate Jessica's note earlier in her presentation where she said it's about choice. These kids and victims are typically, all of their choice is taken from them. And so one of the things that we really try to do, is make sure that we give them that as well. But sometimes in order to, make different decisions, then they have to have more choices. And when kids are not in school, and we recognize that there's a direct correlation into if you are consistent in school, if you are falling behind in school, if you were left behind in school, then it's very easy for a young person to divert their attention and just decide that this isn't for me. And it really is a simple solution, is that you just need to have somebody in your corner that will advocate for your counselor, for your school, and really help you verbalize where you got lost to begin with. And so education is just like a huge system, but we go a step beyond here and we really bring them to the table and allow them to talk to us about where they are and what they need. And when survivors feel comfortable, I've worked with lots of survivors over the years, and really they feel so uncomfortable when, you're just telling them what to do and you're not telling them how to do it. And so one of the things is we really have to be the guide on the side and teach them how to make the decisions and how to weigh decisions and options and make what's best for them. Because we can sometimes, and I've seen agencies sort of assume the role as the pimp, it's like, hey, I'm helping you now. I'm not forcing you to have sex with me. I'm not forcing you to, I'm not paying you $40 to do this, but I need to count you for my grant numbers. And if anybody else has experienced that, please chime in. But I've had survivors say to me that you don't really want to help me. You just want to count me for your grant. You just want to know my story so you can go out and tell it to raise money. And so for us, we just really believe that just educating them and even going one step further and ensuring that they are able to tell their stories how they would like, when they would like, and have control over that is just really, really important. And we'll go to the next slide. And here's where I think that this is the part that I get the most excited about, because when you talk about human trafficking, it really does feel overwhelming, especially when you include sexual servitude and labor as well. The problem is very overwhelming. But the truth is, not one nonprofit can do it by yourself. If you say you are, I'm going to be very suspicious of you, because there's just no way that you can do it all. And so partnerships are very important. But the part that makes me really, really happy is that there are ways that we can intervene earlier. On the left side, that blue box that you see, that is courtesy of GEMS, Girls Educating and Mentoring Services in DC, because they are they provide this continuum. And when I saw this years and years ago, it was really exciting to me because it could allow me easily to share the journey of how that person got there and the glacier, because you're not, you didn't just wake up and decide, I'm 17, I want to be a prostitute. This is exactly what I want to do for myself. That's not how it happens, And so what we see in our work is that there's typically a journey, but the good thing is that we can start to intervene, and we have about 4 points of intervention that I'll just sort of share as some of my highlights. Did my screen transition? Sorry, I'm not
You're
sure.
You're still good, Jennifer.
Okay, good. And so the first opportunity, I think, is to really intervene and really talk about how kids begin to link love with sex and abuse, when kids should really be linking love with family. There is, I think, some violation of boundaries that happen and guilt and shame that happen when kids have been involved in sexual abuse that people just don't seem to address. And you don't address it outside of their therapy, if they're even able to get that. And I'm going to go out on the limb here as well, just to say that women, and even women of color, we haven't done a really good job, I think, of saying to people younger than us that it's me too. That's why I really like the Me Too movement, because it really sort of helps people to realize that you are not alone in this. And so many times that we are unable to reach a child because they feel so alone and so ashamed that no one else has gone through this. No one's going to really step up. And like, dare I say right now that if you are a sexual assault, sexual abuse survivor, are you willing to chime out and say, me too? Are you willing to share that? Because until I think that we're really able to have adults who are really able to not hide behind that and feel ownership of that, then we're going to continue to have kids that hide from sexual abuse. And when you begin to hide sexual abuse, that is when you get to the point to where you start to view yourself as a sexual object. That is where you start to have that lower self-esteem. That is where you start to feel like that you don't have that value. That means that you deserve to be healthy, happy, and whole for no reason. Kids should not be out here figuring out how to pay their electricity bill. Kids should not be here trying to figure out how to pay for their school uniforms. And those are the things that we offer here through our center. And even with some of my grant money, I'll pay a utility bill if necessary, because we recognize that if the home is not healthy and happy, no matter how many services I'm providing to this child, they're going to stay in that vulnerable situation. And if you have a thought about any of these intervention points, please feel free, to, shout them out here. But there's so many different ways. If you look at intervention 1, 2, and 3, the things on the right-hand side are things that any youth-serving organization, any mentoring program, any faith-based group, all of these things can be addressed at the community level and not at a serious intervention program once they've gone through the system. And if you'll see all the way down at the bottom, that is where the pimp is into play. And that's where you, as organizations, are using your skills and your lessons learned to train, law enforcement to go after those bad guys. This is where, you're disrupting the adult sex market because kids are caught up in there. I won't go off on my tangent about Jared Fogle in Subway, but I think that was a really big case because Jared Fogle was engaging in what would seemingly look like the adult sex market, but he would use those adults and ask them to bring in younger girls. And I think that is how buyers have come to make it easy, because these are not just your pedophiles. These are people who just have a dirty little secret and they know that no one is watching. And so these intervention points, I think, are really helpful because they really help us to sort of break down what we can do to sort of intervene and jump in there. And so now I'm going to take the next 5 minutes and sort of do a little bit of like a Q&A and introduce the fabulous Dorsey Jones. Dorsey Jones has been on staff with us for over a year now, but she's been an ambassador for us for the last 6 years. She comes to us with a degree in criminal justice, and she served as a probation officer for 13 years prior to her joining our team. And I just want her to share with you, just sort of, since we're talking about survivors, what it's like when you interact and how you become aware of that. And then also just have a little chance for her to share about, as a survivor leader, what's happening. And I'm going to switch and let her get in the hot seat, and it'll be like an impromptu interview. So, welcome, Dorsey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the webinar.
So I'll let you just jump in, and again, this is like a Q&A, and again, trust me, Dorsey is already an amazing advocate, because not only has she written a book, but again, she gives of her experience. And I'll just say this, that when you have a young person prior to this, when you have a young person who is afraid because not only are they becoming self-aware of what has happened to them, just imagine what it feels like when you think you have a boyfriend that loves you and you find out that he's taking advantage of you and he's using you. That's a hard pill to swallow. And sometimes you just think that no one understands, but I promise you, it used to take about 3 months sometimes for a young person to disclose, because it just feels comfortable. Having Dorsey on staff with us, sometimes it takes a 30-minute conversation on the first day that they walk through our doors. And so, Dorsey, would you just share a little bit about your team, like what you do here on the team, and why you've chosen to share your life story to help others?
Okay. First of all, I want to tell you thank you for having me on the webinar. And when I was 6 years old, I was violated when I was actually 11, and from 11 to 17, I used my body to take care of things that needed to be done in our home because my mother wasn't doing her job as a parent. So when I became a probation officer, what happened was I was so afraid to tell anybody what had happened to me because I was embarrassed by the lifestyle that I lived, and I had so much shame in my community that people would call me the little whore, and it robbed me of my self-esteem, and it caused me to not believe in myself. So when I had an opportunity to come to Atlanta and attend college, I realized that after I got my degree and became a probation officer, I was living a lie. Like, I didn't want anybody to know the lifestyle that I lived. So it was easy to just pretend that I was somebody that I wasn't. And it wasn't until a young girl came into my office and she displayed some of the behaviors that I once had as a young person. And I realized that at that moment I had to pull back the layers and began to let her know who I was so that she could be comfortable and we could intervene and change her lifestyle.
And so why do you feel like that survivor leadership is important? And as a survivor, how can organizations help you along your journey?
Well, as a survivor, it's so important, especially of a woman of color, using my life experience to help children. Survivor leadership locally and nationally is very necessary, simply because a lot of times children, they won't expose themselves of it, having had the person to sit down and share with them that that's the kind of life that they live. Mm-hmm. You know, like if you don't know what it's like to be hungry, you can't tell me what it's like to be hungry. But if I can come to you and tell you that I have experienced the things that you are experiencing now, it kind of like put a protection, it put a level of protection down where that person comes out of their shell and they're able to allow you to explore your life to them, and then they'll give you feedback of what's happening to them.
And one of the things here is that we've always sort of wanted to highlight Dorsey's voice. And so just share a little bit about what it's like when people ask you to tell your stories, and when it's done appropriately, and also when it's done inappropriately, and what it means to you as a survivor to be able to share that.
Well, I realize the more I speak, the more I realize that I'm not telling my story, but it's a part of me. And a lot of times I have people to ask me to come and share my story. And when I share my story, they don't compensate me for my story. It's almost like I'm being taken advantage all over again, just like the men in my community who slept with me. And a lot of time agencies and groups, they need to understand that when people are giving of their time, then they need to be compensated for that. And also, you have agencies and organizations, they'll tell your story without getting in contact with you, asking you, is it okay if I tell your story? Is it okay if I share? Because at the end of the day, you have to understand that that story is a part of that person's life. They went through that. They experienced that. So no one should have the right to just tell a person's story without getting permission first to do that.
And just if anybody just had a question, I know we are wrapping up here. It's like our last minute ahead, but like working with survivors, and I've heard lots of accounts, but I just want Dorsey to be able to share that, when you have a survivor, on staff, and you're looking to bring one on there, what are some things that people need to know? Because I know some people just really have a hard time having tough conversations, but with Dorsey, there are a lot of times that I really have to push her, and I want to bring her out of that, and so she's been on her own journey. But just sort of give us any lasting words, just sort of on what it's like, having someone on staff and why they should do that.
Well, first of all, it really is a motivation tool when you have somebody on your staff that's a survivor, but at the same time, you have to understand that a person is shy, and it is hard to come out because you're not confident. You have to understand that it's been years that a person haven't had the willpower to stand up on their own and truly believe in themselves. So even when they get into an organization where there is somebody that care and want to push them to 110, they have to know within themselves how powerful they are, and they have to walk in that, and they have to believe in themselves and realize again that they're not their story, that it happened to them, but they can use that as a tool to help so many people to overcome that thing that they are having a hard time dealing with.
So I'd like to just thank Dorsey for joining me. I pulled her away from work and timesheet, but it's, as she just said, like it's very necessary, and I don't think that we would have been as successful as we have been without having this representation. It matters, and I think that if we all sort of keep that in the forefront as we're doing this work, then it will help us sort of move to the next level. So, Pervy, as you go to the last slide, I think it will have just my contact information on there. Thank you all for what you guys do in your work, and stay steadfast and trust the process. And I look forward to staying connected with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Thank you so much, Jennifer. You've given us so much information in terms of thinking about how do we have a survivor-centered framework? How do we address the root issues of why youth sexual exploitation happens and trafficking happens? And I love the ways in which you and Jessica both have spoken to, the direct services around economic access for survivors, but also the bigger picture. How do we disrupt capitalist demand for sex, demand also for prisons and incarceration and exploitation of our bodies in different ways. So thank you so much for bringing all of these frames to the table, and also the possibilities for how we can actually disrupt economic violence and enable more justice. So we'd love to hear, we have a little bit of time now, about 12 minutes or so for questions. So folks who are on, we'd love to hear what strategies resonated for you, what tools you can take away in your work to end violence and with survivors, what resonated with you? And also, are there strategies for economic justice that you're bringing to the table that you want to add to the pool? Again, we know that all of y'all are working really hard every day serving our communities, serving survivors. And so, please do add in the strategies that you use on a daily basis as well. And again, if you have any questions, this is a great time to ask. Feel free to put it into the chat box. And I know that there's already been a lot of gratitude in the chat box. So again, thank you so much, Dorothy, Jennifer, and Jessica. You've definitely given a lot of information for folks. So feel free to utilize the chat box again for strategies, resonance, and sharing resources. We here at the Women of Color Network would also love to hear your input on what economic justice would look like for survivors. So often our work is about really noticing violence, noticing the impacts of violence. And for us, we also want to spend some time thinking about what would justice look like? What would liberation look like? And so that we have a map of, what we're thinking, what we're moving towards. In that vein, I wanted to give a little bit, I'll come back to the resources, but one of the strategies that we at the Women of Color Network are so excited and impressed by, and a community mobilization that really gets to challenging criminalization of poverty has been the Mama's Bailout movement, which has really been a community-funded campaign to ensure that folks who are not able to afford bail don't have to just stay in jail, and again, to just be criminalized for being poor. And, that work by Southerners on New Ground and other organizations has been really transformative and, again, enabling economic access and resources. We also want to lift up Kiyomi Fujikawa, who brilliantly speaks to the need for shifting economic realities, and particularly speaks to how this is essential for trans people because it's a violence prevention strategy, and that trans survivors may stay in relationships to fulfill basic needs, as we also heard from our other presenters today too. But also Kiyomi speaks to how systems are more invasive than one person, and that we need policies that build power. Our solutions aren't traditional trans brilliance. It's happening and shows our resilience. And I think we saw that in both what Jessica and Jennifer and Dorothy spoke to today in terms of, again, the really deep structural and individual and connected situations of violence our communities are experiencing, but also the radical ways in which individuals, community members are making transformation possible, whether it's through enabling transportation access, childcare, whether it's through going to an immigration hearing, or whether it's building power again through enabling partnerships, as both Jessica and Jennifer spoke to. So all of those are crucial in the work that we do. So I want to just say from the Women of Color Network, thank you so much to everybody who's been on. Again, I know each of you is doing such vital work in our communities. I want to thank you so much for the hard work that you do every day. Your work matters. It has always mattered, and it matters so much more at this particular moment in our history. We have one more webinar next Tuesday that's going to focus on reproductive justice, as well as really hands-on information about income and credit building with survivors. And so we hope you'll have an opportunity to also join us for that webinar. You can find our webinar recordings and some of our previous presentations and PowerPoints, and also the fact sheets that I had mentioned earlier on our website. Please do feel free to sign up for our mailing list to get more information about our future programs, including our summits and regional convenings that we hold. We do have a national summit upcoming in September that will be in Baltimore, and we'd love to have many of y'all join us for that. That also will be a gathering of brilliant advocates, such as Jessica and Jennifer and Dorothy. So we really welcome y'all to come and also share in the brilliance of that space and add to it. You can definitely follow us at WCN Network and For the Poets. We'd love to keep in touch. And finally, again, moving back to where we see economic justice and where we see that vision for what we're looking for survivors and our communities is rooted in healing and interdependence and at liberation. And so I want to end with another couple of voices from our economic policy and leadership convenings. Noreen Hill from Native Women in Need, who spoke to, I use my culture to get back my healing and wellness, and we are medicine for each other. And finally, Black trans woman advocate, Elch Hearns, who talks about how healing should center work on violence, and we need to build opportunities for love. So in the vein of building opportunities for love, thank you all so much for sharing your time, your resources, your energies towards advancing justice for survivors in our communities. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And again, thank you so much for taking time to share with us today. And that's our contact information, so do feel free to be in touch. We'll send you the webinar recording link as well as a survey. We'd love your feedback. It really makes a difference in terms of how effective we can be in terms of providing resources. And again, if everyone can just take a moment to thank Jessica and Jennifer and Dorothy for their brilliant wisdom and sharing of resources, that would be fabulous. So a collective round of applause and snaps for our amazing presenters who've been doing amazing work each day. And thank you all again for the work that you do, particularly in this urgent time. All right, have a great day, everyone.